Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the unceremonious start to what is the first ever, as far as I'm aware, AGK Twitch broadcast. My name is Lee Bamba, and I want to tell you a little story. A couple of days ago, I was in a meeting, and it was challenged upon my very soul that AGK Tier 2 is phenomenally more difficult than AGK Tier 1, and I disagreed. I said they are practically identical. It's the same commands. The commands you use in Tier 1 Basic are the same commands you use in Tier 2 C++. And so what remains is this scary barrier of having to learn C++. But actually, a lot of the traditional difficulties are really about wrestling with APIs and SDKs, not necessarily the syntax itself, which I find quite elegant and normal and nothing to be afraid of. So, the purpose of this broadcast... Oh, and hello to all those out there in live land. This is live, by the way. You're probably seeing this as a video because I haven't really announced this. This is a surprise attack Twitch broadcast that nobody knows about. So if you are here and you've managed to discover it, find your way here at very short notice, congratulations and welcome. For the rest of us, we'll see this in video land, and it's going to act as a long-lasting testimonial as to how you can get your Tier 1 knowledge, that's your basic knowledge, to work for you in C++ land, which is Tier 2. It's a bit of a clandestine mission, really, because what we're looking for right now are Tier 2 AGK programmers to help us create some little educational mini-games. Very, very simple games. We've even wrote the framework, so you just have to enjoy yourself writing the good stuff. And we're going to give you £500 as a lovely little wage for creating these educational apps. So it's a huge win-win. Now, the problem is we have a lot of Tier 1 basic AGK programmers who haven't made the leap to Tier 2 or don't want to make the leap to Tier 2. And what I want to do is to show you how it's accessible, easy, straightforward, nothing to be scared of. And then once I've had my little speech, my little moment, I'm going to see if there's any questions that were raised today. I'll be very surprised because there shouldn't be anyone here. But there will be questions during the week, and I will be able to answer those questions next Thursday at 4 PM British Summer Time, that's BST. So probably a few more people would show up then, and I'll provide all the answers and fill in the gaps where there may have been gaps. Now, normally, if you are accustomed to my other Twitch broadcast, which is the Game Guru side of things, I usually say I'm going to do half an hour and then whitter on for a whole 60 minutes. This isn't going to be that. I don't think I have more than 30 minutes to say, and I kind of want to keep this short and sweet. If my audience are AGK coders, I'm talking to programmers, and they don't want me to waffle on. They just want to show me the stuff, you know. Show me where I download, show me what I press, show me where I go. They'll leave me alone. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to start straight away. But before I do that, I'm going to look at the chat session because it is live and there might be something urgent like Lee, shut up. Yes, just lots of hellos, which is great. And we've got a few people they managed to find their way here, which is great. And someone has to leave already. They're going to catch up on video, which is fine. Absolutely fine. And it will be on YouTube for all time. So you'll always be able to refer back to this into the future. So we're going to start off by launching AppGameKit, which you can get from Steam. As you know, this isn't a sales video, I should add. This is only for people who already know AGK quite well. These are for people who really know how to create AGK Tier 1 stuff, are creating some amazing things, but haven't made the leap to Tier 2 or are a bit frightened to do it. A little question just popped in. I'll try and answer them as I go, because otherwise I'm scrolling through a huge list right at the end of the session. The question is which platform the game should compile for. The two platforms we're targeting are iOS and Android. So you can do all your testing on Windows with the correct resolutions and aspects, but your target platforms are iOS and Android. And as anyone knows in AGK, we're pretty much device agnostic, so once you've written it with a certain with a resolution in mind, it will actually work on anything that we support within reason. There's a couple of codicils there. So I'm just going to walk through how a typical Tier 1 user might go about things. I've just clicked the open button. I'm going to open up a project. This is a game written by my colleague, who isn't a programmer, by the way. When he wrote this, he was financial director. But AGK was so easy to use, he managed to write a whole game. So kudos to that guy. We'll press run. This may be familiar to most people who've used AGK. Snake Snacker. A great first game to write. The logic isn't too difficult. And you get to put a lot in that you would find in a game. Oh, golden apple! You get to put a lot in that you would find in a game of much larger things like difficulty, progression, and scores and high scores, music, sound effects, background, foreground, scenery items, and player. Lots of elements compressed into a tiny little example, which is why it thinks it looks really good as a sample game. But don't think this is, an example of what you are going to create in AGK and put it on Steam. This was really just to give you an example and keep the code nice and simple so you can then walk through it, which is fortunate because that's now what we're going to do. I'll just ram into that rock. Yeah. So there you go. A nice simple game. Going back to the main menu, and that close button was added since I first saw this game, so it shows how far, how long it's been since I actually. And that's another thing. I have not really laid my hands on AGK in quite a while. My project is the Game Guru development. This is a development now run by Paul Johnson that does an infinitely better job than me. The compiler's increased in speed by about 6,000%, so it's in good hands. But for someone who's not that, using it every day, I can still show you how to convert this into C++. And I must make a little warning: I'm not going to convert the entire game into C++, and that will become evident when you start seeing me go through the motions. But you'll see, you'll actually want me to stop after a certain amount because you'll get it. You'll say, I see what you're doing now. You don't have to label the point, you don't have to complete the rest of the thing. But the idea is, had you continued to the end, you would actually have Snake Snacker running in Tier 2 in C++, and you can run it just as you did in Tier 1. And you'll actually be completely familiar with everything because, if you know Tier 1, your Tier 2 stuff will look very, very similar. Very similar. And I'm going to show you that now. So as you can see in Tier 1, we've laid it out as simple as we could imagine it. Originally it was long time ago, like 10 years ago, its sort of grandfather was Data Basic, which also was a basic lexicon, but it actually put spaces in between all the functions. And in the feedback, when we was looking at, what language should we do next, they said, well, get rid of the spaces and get rid of really, really long commands as well. But we didn't get rid of the really, really long commands because they're really, really useful. But we did get rid of the spaces and we added brackets. And in doing so, we sort of a little baby step towards C++ and all the other modern languages that you may run into in your career as a computer programmer. So we got the best bits of others, but we threw away all the stuff we felt we didn't really need, semicolons and other icky things. We wanted to keep that simple programming. It would allow you to do spaghetti stuff. So, sales pitch on Tier 1. All of you are all using Tier 1. You're interested in how do I get my stuff to Tier 2. I'm going to show you how to do that now. So the first thing I'm going to take you to is this folder. Now, if you install it on Steam, you'll find it in Steam Apps Common AppGameKit 2, and you end up with 5 folders and a little text file. You're probably familiar with this. You probably found the projects folder. You may have run something in AGK that copied it to your MyDocs folder. Well, you've also find you've got a Tier 1 and a Tier 2. If you go into the Tier 2 folder, you've got these 5 folders. Don't worry about what they all do. In fact, for the purposes of this introduction, you don't have to worry about any of these except for this top one, Apps. And inside Apps, really what it is, it's the project file. It's the project file you're going to need. Now I bet you're asking, but what's a project file? You'll know what a project file is in Tier 1. It's the AGK project that you load in. The project file in Tier 2, exactly the same, except you're not using the AGK IDE, you're using Visual Studio. which you'll be denoting by VS. And we actually support 3 versions of the Visual Studio IDE, 2010, 2013 and 2015. And the great news is that 2015 is free. You can get it from Microsoft and download it, and it is free, and it is great, and contains all the wonderful things that you would expect from a modern professional programming language developer environment. So if you go into there, you'll actually see there's a file called .sln. That's called a solution file, and that's what Visual Studio is going to need in order to load up your project. So before, if you've never thought about Tier 2 before, go off to the Microsoft website, get Visual Studio 2015 and install it. And once you've installed it and you've reset your computer and you go into this folder that you'll have in your AGK Tier 2, this folder, you'll see that SLN will have this type filled out, Microsoft Visual Studio Solution. Your computer will know what an SLN file is now. So, hooray. So, I'm not going to run that. What I'm going to do is copy it. Copy and paste. I'm going to give it your name. So we're going to say something like your snake snacker. So that's our own copy now, you see. I don't want to overwrite my template because we want to keep using the templates every time I create a new one. It would be a bit of a nightmare brain ache if you had to create all these files from scratch, because then you would have to understand a phenomenal amount of stuff. Fortunately, with AGK and Tier 2, you can work your way out. You can work your way from out. You can start in the middle and work your way out. And you start in the middle of something that works. So it's very easy. So just double click SLN. If you've installed Visual Studio Community Edition 2015, that's free. There's one that is, there's a lot that isn't free, but the Community Edition is free. And once you've installed that, you double click the SLN file, and what you're seeing now on my screen is what you'll see on your screen. It's basically just reading all the files, creating little caches and shortcuts just to speed up the editing process. And you'll notice you've got solution template and template, but just called everything template. It keeps things easier. So what I'm going to do is right click that and rename it to your snake snacker. Don't use spaces. That's been my experience. And there's another one here, so your snake snacker. So the next time you double click a SLN, you know you're in the right place because it'll say it here rather than everything saying template. You could rename template.cpp and to your own files if you want, and then link them back in, but we don't need to do that. It's not necessary. Now, normally I would just start the port process, but I really want to show you the synergy between Tier 1 and Tier 2 and the fact that you don't have to be scared. If I showed you this now and you was only a basic programmer, say only, it's no small feat, you're not used to the C++ syntax, you'll think, what's all this, includes and namespaces, no, I'm not interested, and go away. Let me show you what this program actually is. If I just copy those first 2 functions, go back to AGK, Tier 1, new, let's call it your simple app, get rid of Snake Snacker, and we start with some of that, so we'll just get rid of all that. And we paste in what you've just taken from Tier 2. Right. This is the Tier 1 equivalent of it. Obviously you don't need begin because AGK would start immediately as soon as you run the program. And instead of a loop which is called each time, we have our own construct in basic, which is just a loop like that. Then the last 2 things you do, get rid of the AGK ::, because those are just to help C++ know which library you're using. And finally, get rid of the semicolons. That's it. I've now gone from Tier 2 to Tier 1, and don't be surprised that it looks identical. It's the same thing. If I run that, make sure you get rid of all the AGK ::. You see this, which is essentially just a print, and it's printing a syntax. Something. If I go to the Tier 2, what I've just copied from, and run that in debug build, obviously it's compiling the C++, linking all the libraries. Same thing. It's exactly the same thing. There isn't any magic going on here. It's the same commands in the same order, slightly different syntax constructions, but otherwise perfectly identical. And I'm going to introduce the differences now just to show you that it's not scary and you can actually get involved in this. What's the benefits to using Tier 2? Well, you get instant access to any functionality or libraries or systems that aren't built into Tier 1. If there's something in using Tier 1 and you want something and it's not supporting Tier 1, you've got to wait. You've got to wait until we add the commands for it. In Tier 2, you don't have to wait. You just go out, grab the libraries, drop them in, start using them right away. The other advantage is that using Visual Studio, one of the most hard-tested visual programmer IDEs out there, with an amazing debugger, an awesome debugger. So there are definite advantages. Also, a slight performance improvement because this compiles down to sort of the native building blocks, whatever, for the device that you're using. There is no the only faster way, and then this is debatable, than using C++ to create binary, is to write it yourself in assembly. But because C++ have amazing optimizers and compilers that can reduce your code into something that's ultra fast using sort of SIMD calls and that kind of technology, likelihood is the C++ version will be faster than one you handwrite in assembly. So just something to think about there. But I digress. Just showing that Tier 2 can go up to Tier 1. It's very interchangeable. But so now what I'm going to do is going to get rid of these because we don't want these commands. We're going to have our own program. Go back to our Tier 1. We're going to load in Snake Snacker again, which is here. Get rid of that for a second. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy the whole program. So Control C, copy all that, and we're going to go to this begin, and I'm just going to paste it in here. Bang. Now don't don't think if I just press run now that's going to work. There is so many levels of wrong, but it's a starting point. Yeah, I'm not going to write it from scratch. Why bother? The Tier 1 worked perfectly well, then my Tier 2 should work perfectly well. So what I'm going to do now, for the time that remains, and there's not much time, so sorry for my usual presentation style of monster waffle, I'm now going to walk and talk through the conversion of Tier 1 to Tier 2. And feel free to fire any questions. I'll probably tag some time for questions on at the end, so don't worry if you think the time is a wasting. So the first thing I'll mention, and we'll put this one at the top, C++ has no rem commands. Rem's short for remark, and remarks in C++ are forward slashes. So just pop them in front of the rems, and now you've got your comments, so you can keep all your comments. The next thing you look at, oh by the way, this symbol, /* and then at the end */, that's sort of block commentary, so you can block out huge amounts. Anything that's here in green won't compile. If I ran it now, it'll compile it. It always compiles, and you get nothing. See, it doesn't compile error because this has all been commented out. I just think this is a lot of text waffle. So these two lines, if you look at them here, out of the comment, both of them, one creates an array and one sets up lots of global variables. In C++, awfully similar. So let's just push that out of the way. We'll create a new comment. We'll call it global variables. And paste these in. So how do we turn a dim entity into a C equivalent? Well, it's very easy. First ask yourself what data type it is. Game Guru by default would use an integer. If you put a hash in front of it, I think it uses a float and then a dollar as a string. That's my bare basic pro knowledge, but very similar. In C++, you tell it what the data type is. Integer is int for short. And if you've got a multi-dimensional array, you can't use a comma inside here. You would use separate square brackets for each dimension. And then, obviously, you've probably seen this before, C++ needs a colon at the end. Everything you have, every line has a colon at the end. You can even have colons inside the same line to separate different tasks, actions and things. So that's how you make an array. You don't need the global, you just need to specify, not dim or global, you just need to specify what the data type is. Again, it's another int. And remember, right at the end you put the semicolon. So there you see, I've actually converted the Tier 1 array and variable declarations into the C++, but they look identical. I'm not changing any names or anything, I'm just slightly altering the syntax, slightly. We'll take the next chunk, and I like tabulations. Whoever wrote this didn't like tabulations. Again, remember we talked about semicolons on the same line. This variable equals this value, this variable equals this value. That's 3 separate instructions. And so each one needs to be divided by the semicolon. Just as we use the colon in AGK, we use the semicolon in C++. So it's very easy. Just keep track of that. Remember, you need a semicolon at the end. The separator is implied in AGK, but you have to specify it yourself in C++. Now, if statements. 3 things to remember about if statements. 1, they need brackets. You need brackets. 2, when you're doing an equals test, like condition this equals that, it's 2 equals, not 1. Easy to forget that one. And your concatenation to concatenate conditions isn't the or, and all that kind of stuff. They're different symbols. So the C++ for or is that, which is 2 pipes. Next thing you got to remember is there's no end if. There's no such thing as end if in C++. It uses curly brackets to define these blocks. So instead of if and end if, it does if, open curly bracket, and then close curly bracket. Then you can get rid of the end if. So that's the equivalent of end if. And similarly, we want to put our semicolons in to identify these as separate instructions and make sure to put a semicolon at the end. That's only one instruction, so again, one semicolon at the end. And then we wait. Now, can anybody guess what we're missing? Why is that underlined in red? Well, if you remember the one we deleted, the original tier 2 program, remember the thing we had to delete in tier 1 all the time? That AGK : Well, what that actually does, it says you're actually using a particular library. It's a namespace. It's a particular library called AGK. And inside the AGK library is every single AGK command. So you'd have something like that. And you see it changes colour to sort of show you that it recognises it. And there's no more red lines. And what that means in Visual Studio is it's pretty clever. It actually sort of pretendly silently compiles it in the background. It does syntax testing. So it's going to tell you it's going to compile before it's even compiled, but we'll just run it anyway. So it's compiling, it worked, great. Nothing's happening because if you look at the program, all we're really doing is doing some variable assignments. So we'll carry on in the same vein. I won't dilly-dally, it's all pretty straightforward. You know about putting a slash in front of though. Ifs need brackets, conditions need 2 equals. This one needs the AGK : There's only one instruction there, so you can get away with that. There's no end ifs anymore, but remember you always need to put semicolons at the end of things. Wait a couple of seconds, no more red lines, which means it's happy and it likes it. Moving on, what are these 2 lovely things? Well, we've recognised that before, that's a global dim, so we'll put this at the top. Get rid of global, doesn't matter, dim doesn't matter. All that matters is what data type it is. It's an integer. And of course it's a multi-dimensional array, so we have to use the separate square brackets. This is something I wanted to rush to before the end of the half hour. There is no such thing as go subs in C++. You could invent them if you wanted to use goto, but then you will be universally scorned if you use goto in C++. It's probably the single most dangerous command there is. Never use it, please. But what I'm going to show you is how to turn your go subs into functions. They'll perform exactly the same task. You just have to use a little bit of different syntax. So what we're going to do is find this subroutine in the code. We're going to make a gap, which means we put we end that comment block and we start it again there. So we've freed this one up. In order to create a function, it's very simple. A function needs define your return type, nothing. You've got the function name, leave that alone. What are you passing in? Nothing. And instead of a load of thing and then a return, again curly brackets define a block. And then remember rem needs to be commented out, just like the if statements. Indent this because I like indents. Just like the if, for also needs a bracket, and you want one at the end. And again, for recognises a block, just like the if and just like the function. And this for, same rules. So there's no next, it's just these curly brackets for blocks. And you'll find it's a little cleaner to look at than seeing lots of nexts at the end. But the curly bracket doesn't really tell you what it relates to. That's why I use indentation. Two more things you need to know about for next loops. It comes in 3 sections. You need to declare the variable. Unless it already exists as a local, you need to declare it inside the for statement. You need to do the condition, which was implied in AGK, but it's the equivalent of what you're used to, is less or equal to. And the last one is what you want to do with a subscript. In this case, we just want to increment it. So after you've done this a while, you'll get used to doing it a lot. And then you'll start having fun with what you do with your for next loops, but that's for a lesson way down the road. Remember your semicolons, remember arrays use individual square brackets, and the void isn't disappearing. And do you know why? Well, I'll show you. That function is actually inside another function. You see that curly bracket? That actually brackets everything inside it. And another rule in C++ is you can't put a function inside another function. All functions have to be declared in the root. You know, they have to be declared at the top. I probably could have searched for this. Save myself 20 seconds, but here it is. So what we do, we're going to cut this. You know what? In order to preserve order of everything in our program, there's a quicker way. Basically, just delete this curly bracket here, go all the way to the top, to where our only program is, and then pop it in there. See? Functions need to be declared. Functions need to be declared in the root, right on this hand side of the thing. And then down there we would have a function. You see there's no red line, that function's happy now. Now it's out in the root somewhere. But you can't call it with goSub. Remember, there's no such thing as subroutines. But calling a function is identical to calling, well, I would think you would call a command. You've just made a command, you see. So instead of a subroutine, you make a little command. It doesn't pass anything in and it doesn't bring anything back, but that's fine. You can do that later. And that's how you did a subroutine. That's how you convert a subroutine. And what I want to do is rush on to that far, because then I can show you something on screen, because you won't believe me unless something's on the screen and it runs, right? I've only got a couple of minutes, but I think I can do it in that time. I should blast through and not try and witter on too much. AGK dink dink. Yes, get file exists. AGK is case independent. C++ is not. Something to bear in mind. So remember our AGK, there's a lot of commands here, so I'm just going to pop them in. Anywhere I think there's a command. You're all commands. You're a command, you're a command, you're a comment. Even sleep is a command, and sync is a command, load image is a command. Now, when you see errors like that, it's only because it wants it in capitals. It's strict like that. And read integer. Good. High score. Now, high score is not declared, so we're going to do that. Remember, you can't just stick a variable in and expect it to work. You have to declare everything in C++. And that ensures that it's safe. Ensures that it knows what the data type is. These two are declarations. We go up to the top. Unless it's otherwise specified, that looks like an integer. This also looks like an integer. I think this is the only app I've seen in a while which is entirely written just using integer variables. So that takes care of that. Remember to put your semicolons after every line, because that's how C++ knows it's moving on to the next thing. You also need to put semicolons at the end of these syntaxes. Now I do this, you think, well, what is this big long line? That's confusing. It's the same as this. It really is. Just imagine every semicolon is implying like another line. But it's nice to condense lines sometimes when they're all kind of doing one thing. Close file. So any lines? New. So if we just did a compile, which is called build, it's not like in clear grid. Now, I'll introduce the last thing to you. It's called prototyping. There's two things we can do. We can either move that function above this function so it knows about it by the time it gets to this line, or you can create what's called a prototype. Now, all that means is you're giving the program advance warning of what functions you're going to use. So, you know, if we do the same as when we declared this, but we don't put any code in it, So if I show you what we had down there, see, that was our function declaration with all the code inside it. But if you actually was compiling begin and you got through to this, at that point you didn't actually know what it was. So what is that? That's not a command I'm familiar with. So what you do, you sort of hint that, look, further on in my program I'm going to define this. But right now I just want to tell you that it exists. So when it gets down to it, it doesn't find there's a problem with it. So we'll try and build that. We'll compile it. It should be successful. You see, I'm not having to write and think about rewriting the program. I'm just doing like for like. This is identical code. So now when I ran, we've got this, which is another thing I'd like to mention. The reason that X is there, it's because you've tried to load in an image. If I go down to this line here, load image, loading.png. And you'll be familiar with the big X. It means it can't find the media. And that's the last thing I want to show before we end this introductory session. If we go back to projects, games, Snake Snacker, this is your current tier 1. This is what you used to. You used to see an AGK files and .agc files and a media folder with all the graphics and things that you want for your game. So in your tier 2, all you do is copy all that media, all that juicy stuff, go to tier 2, go to your apps folder and the one you created, your Snake Snacker, go into final, and you'll notice it's dated like from a minute ago. Your snakesnacker.exe, that is your executable. Now remember, you're actually doing Windows right now. This is your introduction to Windows, just so you can get your app converted and get familiar with Visual Studio and C++. If you're interested, I can show you the same process but in Android Studio and the same process in Xcode. But please don't ask for Xcode. I think we can produce IPAs from Windows now, so hopefully I can show you something without booting up the old Mac. But look, I can paste all that media in, what I just got from the media folder in tier 1. So now it's sitting happily alongside my executable. So now if I run the same executable from here, and voila! It's found the loading.png, it's loaded it in, that's now a big sprite on the screen, and it's not rocket science, it's the same stuff. It's gone through exactly the same declarations of arrays, it's set up some variables, it's called a function, or subroutine, which is now a function, that cleared an array, it's checking for a high score table, it's setting up your resolution, creating a sprite with this image that's loaded, setting the sprite, and then doing a little sleep, and then it moves on. Now when I say it moves on, what I want to show is this is the begin. This is called once at the start of your program, so it's a great time to load in any assets and prepare any values and data that you want. The difference between tier 1 and tier 2 is that there's a subsystem in the background that you can have access to if you want, but we know most people probably wouldn't want. So what we have done is had the subsystem call this function, and this gets called every cycle. So all the stuff that your main loop, your do loop thing in tier 1, imagine you forget about the do and the loop, but you keep the contents. You stick the contents in here, and that's where that goes. Imagine the do loop, and then the loop bit is where all the meat goes inside there. And the end is just a way to clean up and delete any reservations you've got, or perhaps save some settings if you want. But really, as the executable ends, it cleans itself up. It's not going to leave any garbage on your system. The heap is destroyed at the end. But this is really if you want to do other things just before it leaves the app. And that's just about as complicated as it gets. There isn't really much more I can show you in terms of converting tier 1 code to tier 2, because it's much variations on the theme. Creating your data, converting your commands over, changing over the ifs and the for next loop syntax, changing your subroutines to functions, moving your media over, and then making sure your comments have been retained, because comments are always useful. You carry on for another hour and a half, 2 hours in this vein, and just get stuck in, you'll actually end up with the entire Snake Snacker program converted to tier 2 C++, and then this can be run just as a standard Windows executable, just as you used to with tier 1. So hopefully that was a brief introduction. I tried to squeeze it in quick. Sorry if I talked a little bit fast, but it's sort of the best place to start. Grab Visual Studio Community Edition 2015 because it's free. follow this instruction. If you want this documented as well, we can sort of watch the video later and then we can write it down on a piece of paper so you can follow it at your own time. Or you can just keep pressing the pause button by watching this video when it actually gets released onto YouTube. And you'll find that there isn't much mystery. Now, there's a few extra things that you'll want to do with Android Studio and with the iOS exports, but I'll wait for people to ask for that. I don't really want to force a lot of stuff down because I think what I've said already, for me, it was pretty swift and quite natural for me to do. But for someone who's kind of potentially frightened of going into C++ or a bit hesitant, this is probably a lot to take in, and so it's probably a good idea that you just take your time and go through it, see if you take to it, and if you do, yeah, give Rick a call at rick@thegamecreators.com and say you are potentially interested in writing one of these educational games for £500. Thank you very much. So don't email me, email Rick. It's his baby. So I'm just going to go, as I promised, to the chat session, see if there's any questions that anybody has. I'll try to answer them if I can now briefly. And if there's any questions that deserve a longer broadcast session, then I'll be doing another one, as I said, next Thursday at 4 PM British Summer Time, which may be half an hour or an hour, depends how much content you want me to cover. Maybe it's about going into Android Studio and doing the same thing, perhaps using this code. Now, remember with Tier 2, we're not going to ask you to then write some other program. When you write something in Tier 2, it can also be compiled instantly for multiple platforms. You only have to write this C++ once. And then you just set up a different developer environment, take the same code and press the same sort of compile deploy button, and you have the package for Android and the package for iOS, just as you do in Tier 1. It's just that the syntax is slightly different, and that was a point I was trying to make at the meeting a couple of days ago. So, now I've got that rant fully explored, I'm going to go to the chat to see if there's any questions. So if you do have any questions, you probably have about 5 minutes to post them before I start wrapping this baby up. So the last question was, which platform? Yeah, well, we're looking for iOS and Android, but this video applies to if you just want to create Tier 2 Windows apps. So moving on. Got Dozy Hole saying, you compile for Windows only, TGC will compile for iOS and Android. You see, I'm not really fully connected with the project Rick's running, so if that's the case, that's pretty cool. That means you can just get it running on Windows, and then we take care of the hassle of loading up the development environments and compiling it to all the other ones. Which has got to be better for you guys. That means you can just have the fun part, making the game. And I even think we provide the graphics, as I recall. So have a chat with Rick if you're interested. You don't have to be an artist or an audio guy. I think we've got that covered. You just need to be someone who can chain logic together. That's kind of what we're after. And it has to be Tier 2, because that's the projects in Tier 2, which is the purpose of this video, really, to create some conversions to the dark side. Slightly Dev says, glad you are doing some AGK stuff, Lee. Yes, well, I do a lot of programming, but you only ever see me doodle with the sort of the drag and drop and the really easy Game Guru stuff. But yeah, this is my bread and butter, this coding, and you know, it's been ages since I did AGK, and I just took to it almost immediately. It just shows how friendly the language is. I'm really pleased that it has that lastability factor. Ape Spectre says, I could not get the compiled thing to work on Android. That is the problem. Well, it sounds like, if according to Dozy Hole, we're doing that for you. We're compiling it for you. So just get it running on Windows. If your educational game is running on Windows, but there's a framework we're going to give you that takes care of all the stuff like asset loading and screen wipes and things like that, and some classes. But generally, we just leave you with like an init, a do loop, and an end, and you just write your game inside those 3 chunks. So you don't really have to understand the whole dev environment. But if there's a lot of calls for it, yeah, I'll break out Android Studio. It's probably changed phenomenally since I used Eclipse back in the dawn of time, so I'll probably be learning it at the same time as you. But I might be able to bring some insights into it based on my incredibly dusty knowledge. So, Retro Gamebook says it takes me back to the Snake Compo. Yeah. Yes, back in the day when we had competitions. I don't know whether do we still do competitions in AGK? I think if we're not, we really should be because they've been so much fun. Got one from Conrad. He says, "Will a transcript of the chat be posted up later too?" Sure. The transcript. I mean, the chat gets wiped out as soon as I leave the websites, but I think I can copy the list and maybe put it in a. Where would I put it? Actually, there is a thread I actually opened up announcing this broadcast, so I'll probably paste it in there. So yeah, I'll hopefully remember that and not just click off on the browser. You can rewatch it on Twitch 30 days, and there is a chat replay. Oh right, I didn't know that. Yeah, Twitch has the chat replay on the broadcast. That's pretty cool. Didn't know that. JB the next says, "This is the page you will find it," and is. Or basically, it's twitch.tv/GameGuruLee/profile. I think that's where you can get it. And Ape Spectre is questioning whether this is a crash course. It definitely is a crash course without the crashes, which is quite remarkable considering this is live and unrehearsed. Ape Spectre asks, "Where is the Linux project file?" Haven't a foggiest idea. This is my first foray into the Tier 2 folder in quite a while. So your project should be up around here. So what do we have? We've got the Android, Google, Amazon, and Ouya. BlackBerry, all them Windows ones. I don't see a Linux. So there are better people than me to answer that. You will find your answer in the AGK forum. And if you still don't get your answer, use our live agent system, which is this little green button here. Click that, ask the same question, and I can get your question directly to the author, which is Paul, and he'll you know, if he doesn't know, it doesn't exist. And I'm pretty sure it does exist because we've been talking about Linux. I guess it's not supported. I think it is. I think we've been talking about Linux for a while, so I'm pretty sure we're supporting it. Well, you'll find out. You'll find out when you pose the question. Can you bitwise compare the two executables? Don't have the app for that. I can compare the text equivalent with WinDiff. I don't have a tool that compares the binaries. They will be different. I can tell you that right now. The natively compiled C++ will massively optimize what you've written, so it'll be smaller and faster and completely different binary wise. But yeah, I'm sure there's tools out there that let you do like for like, just have a bit shufty. And yeah, the results are in stream. Please post them in the thread. If you go to the AGK product chat, I posted a post about this, and you'll be able to post any bits and bobs relating to this there, so everyone can have one place to find everything. Vanna is actually on the call. This is the guy who wrote Snake Stacker, by the way. He's actually stating, "I wrote the game 20 years ago." I wrote that game 20 years ago after I last... Oh no, he wrote the game 20 years after I last coded. And it was on a very early version of AGK, so be kind to my code. Yeah, he actually was a programmer back in the day when... well, I won't be... Yeah, okay, 8-bit. That's not being cruel, is it? 8-bit's still cool. That's when he last programmed anything. Okay, it looks like we've got quite a chat going on here. What have we got? Although if else without brackets are allowed for one command, I recommend to always add curly brackets even for one instruction. It's a personal choice. I actually personally agree. I love curly brackets. I put curly brackets everywhere and nest everything. But it is a personal choice, and you'll find that out as you start using C++. It can be somewhat forgiving. Scrolly. Any more questions before we call this what is now a 45-minute broadcast to an end? Slightly Dev asks, can you produce IPAs on Windows? I believe you can. I believe that has been added, but only for Tier 1 as I recall. Let's have a quick shifty. iOS, export AGK player. Yeah, I think that's Tier 1. I think for Tier 2 you're going to need the development environment on a Mac, which is odd. But no, it's not odd. It's very, expected that Apple would put all the software on their devices and not let it run on Windows. But I'm pretty sure you still need a Mac to produce a IPA. But for the purposes of the project that Rick's running, we'll be doing the compiles to Android and IPAs, so you don't really need to buy a Mac to actually get involved. Just do the Windows version. And I suppose that's a pretty fair point. If you've only got a Windows PC and you want to publish on iOS, but you don't want to buy a Mac, then yes, Tier 1 has definitely that advantage. But you'll find when you start using Tier 2, there's a lot of disadvantages that you didn't know about. But I'm happy to be corrected on that one. Synchromesh posting, I am late to the party. Don't worry, this will all be on video form in about an hour's time, and then you can listen to it over and over and over again. We've got a question from Customize. How can I install new Raspberry Pi AGK? How can you install it? Well, first you need Raspberry Pi. Now that isn't some sort of recipe or an order from Asda. That is a device. It's a very cheap device. It's the tiniest computer I've ever had to use. And it's predominantly distributed into schools and camps and institutes and other places who want to learn about computers and building up from the ground. And Raspberry Pi is a pretty, multi-million pound distribution. Sorry, multi-million unit distribution out there in the world. And we decided to support it because it was very close to one of the other platforms that we had. And you would need to Raspberry Pi, get the keyboard plugged in, get it connected to an HDMI monitor, and then put your AGK on an SD card. Not this one, it's a new one. Now, we did a press release, but have we listed it here? Oh, by the way, yeah, Linux is supported, by the way. But you'll have to ask Paul where the files are. There it is. If you click that AppGame for Raspberry Pi, it's free. Click this button, you get a file, put it on an SD card, take the SD card, put it into your Raspberry Pi device, and then you can install it on the Raspberry Pi device, and you get the IDE, you can write games, and it runs on the Raspberry Pi, it even runs 3D, it's totally awesome. And just as a cherry on top, or a raspberry on top, you can broadcast what you've made on the Raspberry Pi to your Android device if you've got the AGK player. So it's totally awesome. And it's totally free. So please do check that out. Don't ask us why we're making it free. We just think, look, it's a great movement, this Raspberry Pi. Bringing computers into the schools, bring it into affordability for anyone to get started programming and using computers. We think it's an awesome idea. So this is our little contribution to it. And hopefully, maybe down the road, people would then want to use what they've learned and then go on and make iOS and Android distributables. In which case, you can go on Steam and get AGK for a few quid. And the next question, or is it a statement? This is from Ped Garcia. A useful feature to convert BASIC to C++ is the columns section on VS. Hold Alt and select a block. If you select an empty column, you can all AGK type only once. Yeah, that sounds like something Visual Studio would be able to do. I'm not going to try it because we're running out of time and I'm probably going to mess it up. But yeah, if you want to post a little more detail of that in the AGK thread that I've started about this Twitch broadcast, then yeah, in my spare time I think I'll try that because it sounds like a pretty cool time-saving feature. Irvana asks, Lee, mention the Pi version released today. I have mentioned the Pi version released today. Hopefully everyone saw the big Raspberry and the AGK page where it lives. You click the download for free. It has lots of cool things. You still got ability to broadcast. It's royalty-free development, and it's as you would expect. It's AGK for Raspberry Pi, and I've seen a demo of it running on there's like 4 versions of the Raspberry Pi hardware. The latest one I think is Raspberry 3. There's Raspberry 0, Raspberry 1, Raspberry 2, Raspberry 3, and the 3 one runs a 3D demo at like 60 FPS. So it's really come a long way since I tried to move a sprite along the screen with Raspberry Pi 0 and cringed and then left it for a year and a bit. But it's improved since then. So we looked at it twice and we thought, AGK would do very well there, teaching people how to create games very quickly on a device that's very accessible. So please do check that out if you are interested in the Raspberry Pi. And if you want me to go into more details of it, I'm quite happy to do that. I'm pretty much separated from the project, so I'd be quite interested, you know, if you give me permission to go in and actually play around with the latest version of the Raspberry Pi and install it and maybe do a Twitch on it. Yeah, I think it'd be great fun. Show you what I get up to. And I think there's one more question at the bottom. Yeah, there is. And we've got 9 minutes to the hour. Just tier 1 for the Pi. Yes, I think so. Is it tier 1? I'll tell you what, we'll download it. That one, please. How big is it? 126 megabytes. Bom, 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 bom. But yeah, assume yes. Because if you think about it, the IDE's there, the IDE's ours that we've provided. It uses the tier 1, that's the code you write in, you're broadcasting from the IDE, so it's tier 1 there. And you're producing a Raspberry Pi executable, something that runs on the Raspberry Pi from that tier 1. I'm going to say it's tier 1 only, but that's a complete guess. What you really want to do is download this tar.gs file, which is basically a compressed zip file, and then you can explore the files and find out what's going on there. But it looks like I'm almost out of time. So if there's any more questions, you're probably going to have to post in the forum. I'm going to show you that forum now, so I don't leave you in a situation where I've been talking about a forum for an hour and then didn't tell you where the forum was. So help, AGK forum, AGK product chat, and I've not sticked it, but hopefully it got a bit of traffic. So here it is. Twitch broadcast today at 4 PM BST. Learn how to port tier 1 to tier 2 easily. I hope it was easy for you lot. I do tend to talk and assume everyone understands everything. So there's my original post to give you a bit of a background as to why I'm talking here today. And here's some people posting, and please post anything, any questions and stuff here. This will be the place where you request what you may want to hear about next Thursday at 4 PM. If there's something very burning that I will go to tier 2, I will take you up on the offer to create educational games, but please answer A, B and C before I go off and do that. The JB the next asks, is there a board for Pi? Few more down. No question marks. I'm going to assume all of them are just random statements from a fevered brain. Yeah, there is a board. We don't give out the boards. I think you can buy them for like $30. And that board is like the entire computer. They need to plug in your own keyboard, plug in your own monitor, plug in your own mouse. I think plug in your own power supply and provide your own SD card. But apart from those 5 things, the little board is all you need. It's a $30 computer. It's pretty cool. Oh, that's what you mean by board. Yes, he meant the forum, you know, the board. So I'm going to post that off the chat into here. Oh, right, yes, there it is. There's the Raspberry Pi forum board. And I'll hold it on the screen for us so you can actually see the link, which is basically forum.thegamecreators.com/board/56. And you can start getting the SP and the lowdown on what's going on in that part of the world. Super fascinating and utterly exciting. I am far too busy these days to enjoy it myself, but hopefully you'll get some pleasure out of it and keep providing feedback. We thrive on feedback. And just as I'm ready to turn the computer off, more questions come pouring in, which I'm happy to answer if I can. Plans to access Pi I/O ports via AGK? Well, Paul anticipated that particular one because it's probably one of the cooler aspects of the Raspberry Pi that you can turn it into a robot, which is probably the first thing I try and do if I get a Raspberry Pi. Yes, you have full control of the I/O ports, so there's new commands, there's new AGK commands that can actually read and write from those ports. Super exciting, and no danger of blowing yourself up because all that has been taken care of by the Raspberry Pi hardware. So that was the last question. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast. I knew it was supposed to be punchy at 30 minutes, but that was never going to happen. It was me after all. So this has been an hour's Twitch sessions. I'll be back next week. That's Thursday, 4 p.m. British Summer Time. It will be on a subject of your choice. Just post it in the forum I show you in front of the screen here. So until then, I hope you was entertained or enjoyed, or you had a note to spare. And it's fine. Until then, I shall see you next time, and catch this on YouTube. It'll be a video in about 1 hour's time. So until then, I say goodbye.